Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's MillerKnoll Design Perspective. This is our monthly broadcast where we talk about all things design. Today we have Michelle Ossmann. Michelle is MillerKnoll's Global Research Director, and today she's going to share with you our newest CEU on shaping the future of campus design. This CEU is accredited with both AIA and the IDCEC, and it is certified for HSW credit. So we will commit to you that we will submit and you will receive certificates of completion and also submit your AIA and IDCEC attendance within the next 5 business days. When you registered, you should have been able to provide your email and your AIA or your IDCEC numbers. It is important that you do join from your own device so that we can be able to identify you as individuals on this and that we are able to track your attendance. You do have to participate in the majority of this session to get your credit. The other thing to keep in mind is if you do have comments and you do have questions, you are welcome to share those today in your chat. We will be addressing all of those things at the end. It is a CEU, so we are not able to interrupt as we go through the process, but please know if you stay on, we will try to address some of your questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Michelle to take us into the information and the content today. Thanks so much. And Michelle.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Again, Michelle Ossmann, delighted to spend some time with you today and to discuss shaping the future of campus design. So you will forgive me. I do need to say some of these slides rather directly and use all the words. So we're going to go through some of those here. So it is IDIC approved. We do have AIA credit as well, copyright, and this is the part that I must read to you. So in this course, you will learn about recent shifts that have caused colleges and universities to optimize their spaces in new ways and reconsider how to best support students. You'll learn about the 3 shifts impacting higher education and how design can support everyone on the campus through this changing landscape. You'll see how purposefully enabling interactions between students, groups, and the broader campus community elevates the human experience, encourages social interaction, and improves student success. And you'll explore space typologies or settings designed to help campuses prioritize the physical, emotional, and social well-being of campus occupants and help them navigate change. I also must read these, so again, my apologies. Our first learning objective, to understand the state of higher education and shifts to recenter campuses around what matters most to the people working, learning, and connecting in academic spaces. The second is to articulate a framework that supports 3 levels of interactions within higher education spaces: community, group, and individual, and how each can elevate the human experience and encourage social interaction. The third is strategically designed settings that help campuses support well-being, facilitate connection, and navigate change while enabling equitable access, facilitating career readiness activities, and aiding academic performance. And then lastly, implement design considerations to reduce social isolation, promote belonging, improve ergonomics, and ensure the ongoing flexibility of spaces and incorporate inclusive design. Now that we've gone through the technicalities, you can see here, in shaping the future of campus design, we know that like organizations are everywhere, and you'll see as we discuss these topics that many of the overarching premises you could apply to healthcare, you could apply to workplace, because ultimately they are people, right, and they're organizations. But colleges and universities are facing rapid shifts, some that are particular to them, that have caused them to rethink their spaces, especially after the disruption of the past few years. So this does pose an opportunity to recenter campuses around what matters to the people who are working, learning, and trying to make sense of these academic spaces today. So we're going to be looking at insights and design applications to think about that way forward for design on campus. So we're going to start by taking a look at how the higher education landscape is changing. We find that colleges and universities are facing 3 major shifts that impact everything from campus design to learning pedagogy. So the first we have is continuous expansion to optimizing the space, and I think you will agree that we're seeing this particular trend happening across most organizations and institutions worldwide. Moving from a standard learning space to career catalysts, making sense of why and how the university space is going to help them move forward, right? Because the purpose is not just to be in school, but to have a job at the end of it. and then from traditional teaching to both active and collaborative learning and that blend of both. So in the following sections, we're going to look more closely at each and look at the motivators before discussing how design can help. So let's get started. So like any organization, as I've shared, academic institutions are evaluating their real estate portfolios and asking how they can make the most of the real estate they have without adding more, right? Simply to add onto a campus creates all sorts of difficulties, certainly for the students and faculty, much less anyone else who might be in the surrounding community. So we do know that there's a new reality for enrollment. Undergraduate enrollment is declining, and that trend, quite honestly, isn't slowing down. We know that in 2022, less than half of high school seniors enrolled in college after graduation, but community college enrollment is increasing. That non-traditional student is increasing by over 7% in 2023. The reasons are varied. Some have to do with lower enrollment because of fewer children being born in the United States. Distance learning is, of course, becoming more popular, and the increasing price tag of a college degree. In addition, there's this notion that time spent in school and with that college tuition, that more high schoolers are pursuing dual enrollment in university colleges and university courses for that pre-college credit. So the last main issue here is that we're finding that companies are questioning whether or not a college degree is necessary. Is that undergraduate so ubiquitous that it really doesn't mean that you're capable of doing anything that supports the organization in particular? So some reskilling talent at the community college level is also something that's happening as of late. So we also saw that COVID particularly shifted space allocation trends. Research from our design partner, AIA St. Rose, shows that campuses have more classrooms than they need, and they're increasingly being converted to space for collaboration. So, they found that not only is office space declining as a percentage of total space on campus, that more space is being allocated to programs that are not actually part of formal curriculum, since so much of what happens in the learning isn't actually in the classroom itself. So that study and collaboration space is increasing, and we're seeing that more space is being devoted to other kinds of programming, digital labs, multi-purpose centers, and what have you. Generally speaking, these campuses tend to be prioritizing connection spaces and spaces for student experience over a design space for one specific activity. We're concerned about bringing people together to meet, study, and collaborate, things like that. We also know that student wellness is a huge threat to retention. There's this urgent call and need to support students and their mental health. There was this interesting 2023 study that showed over 40% of students felt like they were left out or lacking companionship, and 26% also felt that they were isolated a significant period of the time. We also know that rates of anxiety, depression are going up in students from 2013 to 2023. All, of course, impacts retention and social development. And as we know, that stress and mental health are some of the main reasons students take a break from their education. We'll see, I'm sure you've seen, headlines that reach main newspapers and news outlets talking about the inflexibility that some institutions impose upon their students if they have to leave for these sorts of reasons. So in terms of supporting student wellness, it is a significant issue for organizations as they wish to keep their students enrolled. Finally, we know that student demographics are changing, and so the need to support spaces for those folks is also changing. By 2015, we estimate that 70% of college students are identified as non-traditional, which means that they identify with at least one special characteristic, right? They're older than the traditional college age of 18 to 21. They're people of color. First-gen students, we're seeing first-gen activities rising with special groups and pre-college admission cohorts that come through to meet each other and to spend time together, as well as separate building spaces for those folks. The same for English language learners. Many of them work full-time where they're enrolled and have potentially dependents or family responsibilities. So, we do know that since 30% of them are supposed to work full-time, that's a study from 2024, there's this issue of supporting students in other ways than the 18-year-old that goes to live and spend all their time in their dorm and in their classrooms and go to the football game. It's far more than that stereotypical notion of what a student is. So all of this indicates a need for colleges and universities to really think about how they allocate space. We have such diverse student populations, the concern about mental health and these notions of belongings. All of that suggests that campuses really need to flex for that diverse set of needs while making sure that they're able to have connections between their students. Of course, campuses are also struggling with alternative modes of learning and skill development, and to make it easier for students to complete their activities that aren't necessarily related just to their education. So this next shift is one of the ones that we're seeing that impacts student career readiness. The cost of tuition has more than tripled since the 1970s. And students, of course, know that they're paying a rapidly rising premium for the college experience. With one that just graduated, one that's a junior, and one about to start next year, I can personally attest to this deep concern over, are they going to be able to get a job once they leave this incredibly expensive college experience? So, to get down to the nuts and bolts, tuition has risen more than 1,200% since 1980, 4 times the rate of inflation. And many have that sticker price over $90,000. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen that some institutions have increased their threshold for full college tuition benefits. Emory University, for example, now has a cap at 200,000. I believe so does University of Pennsylvania. We're starting to see some of these schools increasing that cap where you get a full ride. So recognizing that tuition is a significant barrier, even if you have a well-paying job. But that said, we understand the importance of a college degree. Fewer than half of them believe that colleges and universities are doing a good job. The other reason for some of this decline in confidence is the debt that people have, the misalignment with the labor market. I'm really thankful that my children are a little bit older and not one of the ones who I would have quite honestly probably encouraged them to study some sort of computer science and programming. And my goodness, are those folks struggling with jobs given the advent of AI. There's this also perception that universities focus on selectivity and rankings more than caring about the success. And there are alternative ways that folks are getting degrees, whether it's through credentialing programs or certificates, rather than going just to school. So lots of reasons for universities and colleges concerned about how they're going to maintain and increase their enrollment levels. We also know that positive interactions with faculty and those peer groups provide a great deal of connection and increased success for students. The relationships help students navigate challenges. Many of them struggle with them as they learn and grow over those 4 to 5 years, build confidence and stay on track for graduation. That's the key thing, right? So we know, interestingly, that students with at least one deep connection to a professor are 2.3 times more likely to thrive personally and professionally after college than those who don't actually have it. So, despite the evidence that students with career-focused experiences are more confident, there's a survey that demonstrates only 39% of them have ever visited their school's career services office. There was just a piece released this past week out of Inside Higher Education, out of University of Arkansas, the Fayetteville's Fulbright College of Art and Sciences. They have a brand new program called the Faculty Learning Community, where they noted in this piece that students are more likely to talk to a family member they trust than seek out student support offices on campus. And this particular faculty learning community is all about helping faculty learn what each other are doing and what other support systems are available on campus, so that they can not only provide them to their students, but help them know what they can actually access and encourage that relationship, because so many students don't actually engage with all the support that's available to them within the university. We know that connections among students can influence student success. In one survey we have from a large public Midwestern university, students who strongly disagree they were connected with their peers had a 40% learning decline than those who thought that they did. The peer-to-peer piece around So-and-so is a peer mentor in that class, but they're a friend of mine, so I can get some help from them on that subject, are ways that students can provide not only formal support, right? There's a tutor that's assigned, but informal. So-and-so is really good at that. Does the space actually communicate, or are there systems in place that help me feel like I can get some help from the people that I already know in my own network? We also know that the feeling of belonging amongst peers, faculty, and that community support an environment for learning and personal growth. That sense of belonging, which I know we're all talking about so much more these days, is a super strong predictor of student retention and academic performance, especially for non-traditional students and international students. The National Survey for Student Engagement, they looked at this and found that first-year students who intended to return the next year were 15 points ahead on the belonging scale, right? Belonging is a key moment then for students who feel like that they should return to the school that they've already enrolled at and reduce the transfers that we're seeing. We know that belonging is not only just a good thing for retention, but it also supports engagement, persistence as they face difficulties, well-being, and their grades. Given the attitudes around higher education today, we know that campuses need to make sure that they have that return on investment for students, right? They're paying a lot of money. It's a great deal of investment at the level of the student and the family, not to discount faculty who make this their life's work, wanting to encourage spaces for networking, spaces for informal events, helping people have those connections. So any approach to space planning then really has to take into account how students experience belonging, whether it be spaces that support their unique needs. I think we're familiar with some of those more traditional or obvious physical needs, but beyond that, into the psychosocial and emotional pieces that can create a smoother experience for students with disabilities or people who are remote, right? Which is its own form of challenge. Slide advance. So, and our last shift considers the ways that teaching and learning are changing, right? So the future of higher education really hinges on institutions continuously adopting new learning methods. And so we have here from traditional teaching to active and collaborative, recognizing that there are many new kinds of learning and teaching activities that are evolving. There's some fascinating pieces I'm sure many of you have seen in the New York Times recently, looking at how one responds to the advent of ChatGPT in the writing process, and the return of blue books potentially, having smaller classes or using different programs that will allow faculty to use machine learning to grade some of these in-person recordings or videos so that they can know whether or not the student has learned. I think the quote was, you're getting a course in history, not in copy paste. Right. So, as our technology evolves, so do our campus environments to help student work modes adjust, their preferences adjust, and the instructors and professors adjust as they respond to new methods of information, quite honestly, not even teaching. So to back up, we do need to recognize that today's students are falling behind. I'm sure many of you, again, follow in news that there's this notion that we are learning less, not just before the pandemic, right? It was certainly 2023 and before the pandemic, but given this notion that when one offloads one's cognitive work to AI, then that ability isn't within the individual, right? So how we're going to be able to assess this and seeing how students come prepared is certainly something faculty are going to need to grapple with and adjust their learning in the future. Also, teaching styles, they can be a barrier or a catalyst for learning. Now, we certainly know this, and students are showing they have a preference for a wide variety, quite honestly, of teaching methods. It's hard to say whether or not it's a true preference, perhaps based more on the lecture type, the information type. So you can see here on this slide, we show 30%, 36% preferring the interactive lecture, but a full 26% that traditional lecture, right? Where it's just you're absorbing what that professor might be having to teach you. The active learning heavy, only 23%. So, we're kind of a third, around those different methods. So how can we have different spaces that allow for both, for all three, as well as some of these other methods that we may not have even thought of in the past. We also need to think about the online and the hybrid classroom, right? Where the mode of learning that one may be engaging in classroom is decidedly different from what the student who is remote is actually able to participate in, how you have those remote and in-person communities actually work together. So these modes of learning are presenting quite a challenge for higher education institutions. We also know that active and experiential learning, right, although some may prefer that lecture type, really does narrow that achievement gap for underrepresented students, particularly in STEM courses. Those research-based strategies, right? They allow the learners to apply their classroom knowledge to real life situations. So providing maker spaces and labs, which are starting to become more and more popular on campus. I just came off of an 8 college tour with my high school senior, and in every case, I was shown a lab or a maker space indicating and showing where students can come together to be creative in a tactical, practical way. Ways that companies from the local community are coming in, ways to actively engage students and show them what that future career path would be is a key way that finding that academic institutions are seeking to attract their students. We also need to acknowledge we do have that growing population of neurodivergent learners. It encompasses many conditions, not just dyslexia, ADHD, Tourette's, but also autism spectrum disorder and more. So since 15 to 20% of the population identifies as neurodivergent and is certainly going to grow as we discover additional forms of accommodation that's required, dysgraphia being one, if we bring back those blue books, how it is that we attend to those. So one interesting stat, 8% or so of folks with learning disabilities don't take notes in class. So, the different ways that we not only aid the student who's accommodating, but the peer student who may be taking notes that are going to be shared with this student. So it is not just about the individual, but the group that is learning together provides interesting opportunities for academic institutions as well. And of course, classroom and learning pedagogies we know play an important role in the higher education experience and in the learning outcomes for students. So those better outcomes are really what we're going for. So to combat these falling scores, having students that are coming not quite as prepared as we might like them, trying to make sure that we support successful learning methods, that we spark the creativity that is innate in all these students who are coming to learn and grow, and to elevate that experience of the teamwork, right? How can we improve academic performance in this way and flex to allow to accommodate the way each student prefers or actually does learn best? So from this, how can we support people on campus as their needs in higher education continue to evolve? Well, the first thing we need to do is to think about spaces that promote their personal well-being and connections. And these spaces can help both higher education institutions and their students respond to the change. So the way that we think about this is we also need to create spaces that are designed to support relationships. Relationships is really the fundamental piece here that drives success, whether the outcome depends on sharing ideas, whether that's in a classroom or whether that's in a department office. So we know that design can support relationships at multiple levels. We think about them in terms of communities, in terms of groups, and in terms of individuals. So to start, let's think of a community as those who share the same dorm or campus building. It's a good way to think about it. A group is those who are in the same class, right, together. Those who use the same student lounge and the same student college of a similar course of subject area that they're learning together. And of course, individuals as people who are studying alone in the library or a student union or what have you. So in the next bit of time here, we're going to explore some approaches to space planning that supports interaction at each of these levels and help students improve not only their well-being, but to facilitate the connections they require and, of course, navigate change. So it's important before we get started to remember that these settings are not real places. right? These are meant to illustrate, right? To promote and to suggest ideas for you through one possible solution. I once heard someone say that a good way to think about each one of these is a recipe, but of course, each cook seasons it to taste. So these same insights, however, I would say that are filtered through the specific needs of your particular client, your particular design team, your particular academic institution with their culture may inspire a very different solution, and we welcome that, right? Your version may have different materials or finishes or textures and different products, right? The variation is not only something that we expect, but we encourage. So each setting to orient you to what we're going to be talking about next is going to have 2 slides. The first is going to look at the insights and really the foundation of the settings, like how might we think about the principles behind how one would support the requirements of the space. And then the second slide has a set of planning strategies to think about when creating each setting, when you think about each project. So let's start with our community settings. So in our cafes, right? Cafes are interesting because they invite the broader campus community to gather and socialize together with food and drink. That food and drink, the opportunity for sobremesa, as I understand from my colleagues in Mexico City, the lingering over the food and drink also provides that quick touch point for groups to connect or for individuals to rest, right? The lovely part about these spaces is that it does allow for the individual or for a group of people to come together in the same space. In terms of belonging and biophilic design, it can support spontaneous and planned connections among students. We certainly wish to combat social isolation and, of course, bring in the greenery, bring in the outside to strengthen people's connection to the natural world within the built environment. You know, this can even happen when we have snow-laden environments. They can be beautiful, right? Even though I'm from South Florida, so I have a hard time finding that snow can be delightful, but it is one of those elements bringing nature in, and however it happens to show itself in your particular geographic area. The next is weak ties. Weak ties are people, for those of you who don't know, are people we don't know as well and interact with less. But the opportunity is to interact with them and to find them within these community spaces. We know that it's through weak ties, like I kind of know that person, where we learn about new opportunities, where we find out about new ideas, new connections, right? And those fuel actually our sense of security and belonging. There's some new research exploring this idea of a weak tie in terms of its ability to create belonging. It used to be that folks would think that it's only through strong ties that one has community. That notion is being debunked. The one interesting example is this researcher who every morning she would see the person who gave her coffee, the barista who served her coffee, and that tie, seeing that same person every single day, even though they didn't actually have a conversation in another place, helped provide that person a sense of community and connection to that space. The last is flexibility for institutions. You know, we know that this setting can help institutions embrace change, right, through a multi-purpose setting. I can think of about 6 different, all sorts of activities that I could host in this sort of space because it is allowing for multiple ways of interaction, right? Not just, you know, so strongly programmed that it's difficult to allow for new and evolving needs. So here are some planning strategies. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts here. So this setting, where we planned it to support well-being by providing access to daylight, the outdoors, food and beverage. We know that sustenance is the core to hospitality. Also making sure that the furnishings support a range of group sizes and seating postures to let people connect comfortably, however it's convenient for them. You'll notice we do have acoustic panels in the ceiling to help lessen overhead noise. That's certainly going to be brought on by the glazing. Also, we have indoor seating and tables to support a variety of postures for individuals or small groups. We do also have the unobstructed visual connection to the outdoors and to each other. The outdoor collections allowing people to make the most of those spaces and taking breaks outside. In terms of connection, you'll notice that it's non-hierarchical. There isn't a main place for someone who's in charge or a place where someone would feel that they are somehow separate from the other students. So we have regular or counter height tables to allow a natural place for people from all different groups can meet up and touch down, even if it's just for that quick moment. Not saying that you have to sit down to engage with someone, which can be a little bit intimidating, but rather pop by for a little side-by conversation and then keep going. And then change, as I alluded to in the previous slide, allowing for a wide range of interactions, right? And making sure that we have some furnishings that allow for reconfiguration, right? Within hours sometimes, or within days, depending on the need, to adapt to additional activities like student groups or bringing communities in. Right. I think many institutions are now thinking more about how it is that the classes that they offer and the connections for networking and for growing student opportunity is not just at the level of the institution itself, but engages the broader community. After all, that's what you're choosing when you're choosing a university. It's not an island, right? It is situated within a larger city or community. So this next community group is the plaza. So plazas flex to host everything from informational sessions to networking events, making these really ideal settings for career and professional development initiatives. And of course, provide places for meeting places for students. In terms of the requirements and the needs, the autonomy is a key piece here. So having adaptable furnishings and adjustable work tools to enable individuals or groups decide what the right configuration is for their meeting. Not to get tactical here, but I am like drawn to the wheels on that table that automatically communicate without saying a word. I can be moved, right? So how it is we can think about communicating autonomy without saying autonomy. In terms of connecting networks, having flexible and shared spaces, welcome people from across the organization, students, faculty, visiting professional organizations, or anyone right from the community that might be available to help advance student careers to meet and connect on campus, and making those spaces easily attainable and reachable with those communities. We're not addressing parking in this case, but goodness knows parking and the campus master plan is also key to making this sort of space work well, especially for people that are coming from off campus. And then, of course, the flexibility for institutions, right? They have to have multi-purpose connected spaces that allow them to adjust to different sorts of meetings and connect through larger networks. That's why students in many cases are going to an institution, not just because of the education they themselves receive, but the broader connection to the networks and to the community that are available. And these sorts of spaces help bring that community of people together. So again, to get tactical, from a well-being perspective, we've designed this space in this case to integrate circulation and assisted devices. There's lots of different places here where one can choose to sit regardless of what the accommodation or what the particular need might be. We're trying to make sure that we accommodate a broad range of needs without separating users like that, that space over there is for people like you. Right? Absolutely the last thing that one wants to communicate. So making sure that an equitable experience can be had within the same space with everyone. Movable walls can provide flexibility for reconfiguration and create some boundaries for acoustics, which in itself can be an issue and a matter of inclusivity for people who have sensitivity issues. On the connection side, we know that in this case, we're trying to make this space informal by nature of design, communicate collaboration by doing a couple things. Having the generous surfaces, the wheels that allow one to create new configurations for change. You can see some high back chairs to welcome those who need a little solitude in the back corner on the left, pulling away a little bit right from the group, but still being able to be a part is what we're trying to do here in connection. And then lastly, change. Having an intuitive, streamlined kit of parts. The kit of parts, I don't think I could highlight that enough for reconfiguration. I'm even starting to see institutions put up signage that shows and illustrates the different ways that students might choose to organize the space. They don't always know, right? They're not designers. They don't always have a sense, oh gosh, I have permission and this might be a creative way for me to think about how I can do this. Now, I have also seen that it has a lovely suggestion for, and when you're finished, please please bring it back to this, main configuration. Please tuck in your chair. But showing people what they can do is often more beneficial than just saying it's done, right? Facilities folks, architects, designers, we're not going to be in there with the students when they're using these spaces and hoping that they know how they can use their space to its best ability. So now we're going to move into group settings. So student lounges support group or individuals seeking respite, focused work, or casual connections. And this is how we've designed these main spaces to be. So in terms of belonging and ergonomics, right, we want these people to come together to support each other. So in this setting, we're trying to reduce social isolation, right, by balancing spaces for privacy and connection amongst groups by also keeping an open view of the space. I do want to call out that this is something we also do quite a bit in healthcare, where yes, we need to be able to focus and have a moment of isolation, but also want to see who's coming and going. Who do I need to talk to? That need for humans to be able to do that exists not just in higher education, but in multiple work and learning type settings. We also here are thinking about a wide range of ergonomic settings, since much of this group activity does involve using technology and what have you, so making sure that the tools can fit the people who are going to use them. This is a place where we think about strong ties, right? People we know well, people we trust, people we interact with frequently, those who are going to have our back. Right. So you'll notice here that we do have smaller settings because strong ties are often with a smaller group of people. It's not such a large group. Also spaces at the back for some privacy. And then lastly, flexibility for individuals, helping people adapt to change by giving them control, right? Control being that number one piece here in terms of flexibility. So on the planning strategy side, trying to create inviting and comfortable and casual settings, right? Where people can not only have different levels of privacy, different levels of posture, depending on what their need happens to be for that day. In terms of connection, having both that quiet place to focus and think and learn and read that may be together with others, right? The parallel play, if you will. We are quiet together. But working individually potentially as well. Thinking about here in this case, a generous library table with casters on chairs to provide mobile seating so you can scoot in and out and form different groups as you might need to. I can see pulling them into different rooms. Having some head down workspaces that are rather co-located. You can see a small subgroup going off and coming back together. So, in this way, trying to allow for people to, yes, be together in the same space, not feel that they're alone, but being able to pull away when the moment requires it. And lastly, in terms of change, right? Open circulation, opportunities for visual separation. This helps people find people, but also have their own productive flow, right? That, alone togetherness is a key thing here. We're trying to provide a variety of seating options to have choices, right? You'll notice different postures to make it more formal or formal. You can see how one might formally present easily in this sort of space, as well as connect informally, giving people control over lighting, and those work tools, of course, make a difference. Our next group setting is the classroom setting, right? So classrooms, fostering that collaboration and the hands-on activities that we're trying to have in active and collaborative learning when appropriate, right? Of course, sometimes, as I think we discussed earlier, we know that students do wish to have those lecture formats sometimes, but also providing ergonomic support and technology integration for both the in-person and virtual class. This is the tricky part. And when I think we're still only beginning to see the beginning of solutions and creative ways that we can bring technology in, especially for those hybrid classroom settings. So in this case, trying to provide autonomy, right? Autonomy to enable the individual and group, right, through adaptable furnishings, being able to choose how they wish to sit. You can see how we have different ways that one might be part of the group but apart, right? Banquet seatings on the side, as well as different levels if you need to stand up. I personally get sleepy if I'm sitting for longer than 30 minutes. How can a student in a longer class stand up without interrupting or them appearing not to be engaged in the material, but just needing to change their body position? The in-person connections, right? Face-to-face interactions, we know allow people to read each other's expressions. It's such a valuable part of the college experience and why students choose to come in. And we know that it works better than a virtual classroom environment. I just finished my MBA and had a bunch of hybrid students come into the class, and it's a different sort of situation when you can only see half of your classmate, right? And you can't fully see, how they're moving their body in just their head. And so we know that that makes a difference. So thinking about those in-person connections when the opportunity exists. And then flexibility for teams of peers, right? How can they adapt to change by enabling them to reconfigure that setting? Again, of course, you'll notice lots of wheels here to allow people to do that without disrupting the session. So in terms of the planning strategies, providing circulation space for assistive devices, this is critical, right? We don't want folks to have, again, that space over there for people like you, right? To accommodate a wide variety of personal needs. I happen to be a fidgeter, right? How can you let people fidget but not bother other students? Having desks and chairs that swivel and allow people to have that movement, being able to stand up when you need to or pull away. Having padded nesting chairs are an interesting way to both flex up and down when not in use, right? And to adjust those tables as needed. On the connection side, technology-enabled walls and mobile tables and chairs really can allow the presenter or peer-to-peer connections. So you can have a bunch of different ways that one might want to adjust their postures, including the outer seating areas. And it also allows secondary meeting participants, right? So, oftentimes people want to just pop into a class and hear a particular lecture. Let's say there's a guest lecturer coming in that day that's really relevant and it's been advertised to the broader community. Is it easy for students to come in and engage in that set of learning, or are they clearly the outsiders? Is it clearly more difficult for them to participate? And then lastly, change. This classroom offering flexibility with the adaptable seating, making sure we have movable furniture, and then the interactive technology that allows collaborative lecture style learning experiences, what have you. Having central seating and of course the tables you can see with casters to allow for a quick user-friendly configuration. And again, having graphics on walls and teaching faculty. I'm finding most institutions have whole centers where they're trying to enable and support their professors, their instructors, learn new modes of teaching, and using their space as a tool can be a key part of that. So lastly, space is optimized for the use of individuals. So private offices, as we know, offer privacy and certainly provide that sense of ownership for faculty. I know, of course, we're seeing many faculty debate whether or not, is it a private office? Is it a shared office? Do they have a private office at all? This is a long-standing debate that I think we're going to see happen over and over again and for years to come. But certainly the need for privacy, whether owned or not, is certainly not going away, right? The architectural privacy, and when I say architectural, I mean visual, acoustic, informational, is something that is still critical for the individual to be able to have. And so, of course, there are many creative ways that one might provide that. So in this case, we're thinking about the ergonomics for the space, far more to the one or two users or group of users that might use them on a more regular basis. Again, this is a place for strong ties or people that we know well and trust and interact with frequently can be helpful in collaboration. When I was a PhD student, I would have loved to have been able to work directly outside of my faculty advisor's office. It was certainly helpful. I had a setup very similar to this where our head AA was there and she was fantastic to be able to pop in and say, can you tell me when Craig's going to be available? And, having that connection to folks other than just your peers can be really helpful when you have this private to group back and forth setting. And then, of course, flexibility for individuals, having people adapt to change by giving them control. It's really about control and allowing them to be able to adapt to the people rather than forcing the people to adapt to the space. And so in terms of a planning strategy, the private office and the shared workstation here, in this case, we're trying to prioritize wheelchair accessibility as well as adjustable and ergonomics, that being a table stake of requirement, making sure that we have case goods and task chairs in these offices to provide ample storage and allow both a meeting and heads down work, right? The one-to-one, the one-to-two private meeting, but also being able to focus when one needs to. I do think it's important to say that private, as I alluded to before, doesn't have to mean alone, right? This neighborhood setting could facilitate that collegial atmosphere of balancing independent work and the interdependent decision-making that we know happens in that sort of mix of private offices within that larger community space. So you'll notice that we have the workstations that are below standing eye level to allow for visibility and have unobstructed sightlines so you can see who's available to help answer that question, right? Who might be around in this moment. And then change, right? The private or shared office space can change depending on the faculty member, right? Depending on the cultural expectations of the student, of the faculty member. So again, given that we need to make sure that we support real estate allocation savings, we need to make sure that we're good stewards with the spaces that we have. Having these adaptable spaces can be completely critical for success. Lastly, wellness rooms. So wellness rooms supporting the individual well-being and respite, right? So in terms of inclusive design, we know that rest is going to look different for different people. And thinking about the comfort, health, and safety of anyone who may use this space, whether they're trying to stay connected to take time to pause, whether they need to process information, whether they need to organize thoughts, allowing them to filter out noise, again, getting that architectural privacy, right? Acoustic, visual, and informational, to stay connected to what matters to them rather than having to engage with the space outside. Of course, flexibility is critical here, right? Giving the individual control, not the other way around. I find it so interesting that control is always a key point for having happy people. Layout really matters here, right? In terms of making sure that these spaces, yes, not that are just provided, but are also easy to get to. I've seen students having to leave during short breaks in class across the whole space to be able to breastfeed or to pump, right? In the middle of classes, we're seeing students that are not traditional come more and more into the educational space. So thinking about where these are co-located to the learning environments can also be really important. But that aside, making sure that we have the spaces and tools to be relaxed. So yes, providing for meditation. Yes, providing for yoga or prayer. Thinking about nursing, thinking about therapy, allowing someone to have that calming, restorative environment when they need it. We're also showing here case goods to allow for personal lockable storage. So you don't have to tote around some of this heavy equipment or cumbersome equipment that one might require depending on the activity. Having a refrigerator, sink and microwave, all located to support the wellness activity, whatever that might be. In terms of connection, designed to be distraction free, right? So you'll notice that there is not glazing into this space, and that I know can be debatable in terms of safety, but there are certainly ways that one can manage that. Lastly, to think about, you'll notice here we have on the left a height adjustable table, task chair. There's acoustic management paneling, critical for that private conversation, adjustable lighting. We're often seeing that students, faculty are wanting to take private telehealth calls. It's psychology and psychiatric counseling calls, often held during the workday. Where are they supposed to go? Like, do they go to their car? Are they able to have those sorts of spaces with some of visual privacy increasingly being required, even in K-12, quite honestly. In this case, also considering scheduling systems. If you know that your break is only 15 minutes in between classes, but it happens to be booked or used by someone who just needs a wellness moment, but you need to pump, or you have a telehealth visit, being able to know that space is available is a key requirement when private spaces are not assigned. And so lastly here, change, right? Allowing people to be able to tailor it according to their needs. So each room is large enough to support a table. 2 people can sit there if required, and of course can be tailored over time, depending on the needs of the users and the folks in each institution. So that concludes our time in the CU. Thank you so much. and joining us for shaping the future of campus design. And I will stop sharing.
Michelle, thank you. We are getting some feedback here. The information was well received. One of the comments and questions that we received early on was this understanding on the research. How involved were counseling departments of these campuses in developing some of these spaces, considering they are confronting the reality of students more than anyone else on campus? And then there is a tie that, it makes sense, we would think, to tie them into the research or tie them into these conversations because we need them to have an understanding of what the overall goal is. And there is a tie here to budget constraint. Sometimes if they're uninformed, we've got budget, we've got things that we're trying to achieve, and sometimes they're not able to be achieved by budget.
Yeah, well, if I understand your question, because forgive me, it's a complex question with lots of different parts. If I understand our counseling teams being involved in the research around how it is we might design these spaces, yes, there is quite a bit of published literature that goes into the design of spaces for counseling and coaching. Now, in this case, you'll notice we were looking at wellness at the individual level, right? Remote, right? Or the individual being able to get away. We didn't specifically show examples where you would have two people together, right, co-located for that counseling session. And I do think it could look different. For example, one would not wish to have chairs or seating that are facing each other, right? Alport in 1924 and Summer in the 1960s demonstrated very, very nicely that actually the best orientation for any sort of collaborative or therapeutic conversation is actually at the L, right? So that you're not required to give direct eye contact. So I think that's a different sort of design. Now, in terms of budget, I think you're spot on, right? That's always the question. And so in that case, I think to myself, how can these rooms serve double duty? In that one wellness room we showed, let's say that was also a space where formal one-on-one counseling or coaching was going to be had. We might design it differently, right? So that, yes, you could, yes, a breastfeeding mother could use it, but yes, someone could have a telehealth call, but yes, you could have a one-to-one counseling session. I think there are many ways that one can be creative to make the most, to your point, out of a limited budget. That's a great question.
Right, right. And we do have a comment here too, on setting expectations here. The signs that help signs that help you understand how to use spaces, what we call granting users the tools and the perceived permission to make changes within these spaces to fit their needs, guidance on layouts to give them ideas on how to think about what do I need to do and what arrangements of settings helps me do this best. There was some kind of applause and understanding in that helping them set their expectations and thinking about how you might be able to use these spaces, especially they're not facility directors, right? They're not thinking about furnishings, they're there to learn. So some applause for this. I see so many ties here, even to what we talk about in general with any spaces, public spaces, and even in workplaces.
Yeah.
We talk so much about this attachment to brand and mission and this sense of belonging. And, you see that on campuses, many times students choosing a certain university because of maybe alumni or the brand things they represent. So this idea of belonging, we see that in corporate work, and even the challenges and opportunity with hybrid connection, challenging and learning. So much of what we see in universities, I feel like informs workplace. It's almost like the future of workplace. And
They
we
are the next generation.
long had research, that does that. You spoke about some of these private spaces and these opportunities to figure out how they become accessible for students. And, and I just wanted to ask you if you had heard with some of this research, there are organizations that help us, even technology wise, for example, mothers who are still pumping and need a space.
Yeah.
There are organizations that help you manage those spaces, corporately. Corporations can say, hey, we've got, 5 mothers or 10 mothers that need spaces like this, and they actually help you with scheduling. Is there an opportunity to implement things like this in public spaces like universities where you might have a variety of individuals that might need spaces? Could we accommodate?
It's an interesting idea. I'm sure those companies would love to think about the different ways that their service lines could support other sorts of users. user needs. It's not just the breastfeeding mother, it's you have to take a telemedicine call. Like, where does a student do that on campus? If you have a roommate and they're a pain and you don't get along and they don't want to leave, where are you supposed to go? Like the bathroom? I mean, I've got kids in college. I'm telling you, like, I don't know where I would tell them to go. I mean, it can be challenging. So, thinking about how we can help them feel safe, especially if it's a counseling session, right? Really requires, given the mental health issues that we're seeing in students these days, that we would make it difficult to get the support that they need or to continue the support they need with a counselor that they trust, often from back home, is critical, right? So again, I think these ideas, if we will all remember, are simply to inspire you to imagine how you would do it, right? We have so many fantastic designers and architects on this call who I'm sure have many creative ways to think about solving for some of these issues.
There was a comment here, curious with all the changes that campuses are undergoing, is safety, one of these, and is this a strong consideration? And they do reference, even unfortunately active shootings.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. And the question is, how do we think about safety considerations?
With all the changes, yes, is safety one of the strong considerations?
Of course. Of course. We do have to be careful though. In healthcare, we've been thinking about shootings, especially in emergency department design, for quite some time. And I'll never forget working with a group of nurses who were demanding bulletproof glass, but the walls weren't bulletproof and neither were the doors. So, it's a holistic, it needs to be a holistic solution, one that quite honestly is completely beyond the scope of this. Such a relevant question. I can't even imagine what the students in Utah must be experiencing these days as they try to think about how to feel safe on campus. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. That's a really big, important question, and one I think we've started to address in healthcare for quite a number of years, given emergency department design and given the nature of the care that's delivered there, but increasingly a concern, to be sure.
And we do have some comments here on the content. Wanting to share the presentation, please know that each one of our design perspectives are uploaded onto YouTube, and you can search those and you can share the recordings. If you are reaching out from an end user where you want to share this with colleagues, or even from a design firm where you have local representatives, reach out to your local representative in your city and state and work with them to coordinate that. If this is something that you want to have delivered, individually within your firm and you want it to be shared that way, we certainly are excited to do that and want to share this information and to create further dialogue. So please think about that. But if you just want to watch today's recording, you can find that on YouTube, as well as all of the other content that we share each month. And if there aren't any other questions or comments, we can conclude today's session. I want to thank you, Michelle. This was very insightful.
Yes,
I appreciate all of your knowledge that you shared with us today, and the presentation was well done.
Thank you all. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your feedback and your questions.
Thank you.
Take care.